Hello, and welcome to Bust and Beyond with your host, Robin Hayhurst. In this podcast, Robin will introduce guests that have known failure and want to share their story about how they got through it and what happened next. This will make you learn how to see things from a new perspective and avoid making the same mistakes. Please welcome Robin Hayhurst.
Hello, welcome to Bust and Beyond podcast. I'm Robin Hayhurst and I'm very lucky to be here with Julia Starzyk. Did I say that right?
Yeah, well, sounds good to me.
Close, I know. Like I said, my Polish isn't brilliant. Not as good as your English anyway. So you run a construction consultancy, working for clients, quantity surveying and project management. So thank you for coming along. So we've had a pre-chat. We know a few things about you and what's going on. But on the theme of kind of the way that we run the podcast, how did you start in construction? So where did you come from? How did you kind of move over into construction?
God, that's a question. I'm kind of coming from a construction family, to be fair. My father in Poland used to be an equivalent of a building control inspector working on major commercial developments in Poland. So I knew a thing or two about construction from there. And then my mum used to be a construction buyer. She used to work for a company doing roads and bridges. That was quite cool. Pre-credit card times when, my mum would come home with a big bag of cash that she would be spending the next day on some other materials or some other stuff. And yeah, basically, I wanted to do everything other than construction. So I decided to go slightly more towards a creative angle, and I wanted to be an architect. And like we said on our pre-chat, that basically back then at that time to actually study architecture, you'd be given an A1 sheet of paper, a pencil, and 3 hours of time, and you'd have to draw 3-point perspective, lovely drawing of some sort. And unfortunately, I failed miserably. So basically, I moved to building engineering, which happened to be a building next door. I've spent there a year, hated every second of it. It was boring as hell. Came to London for summer, and that summer hasn't come to an end yet.
Wow, how many years ago was that?
Well, 13 years now, 2010.
My word. 13. And what kept you here? Was it love or was it work?
To be fair, it's probably neither. It's probably the actual, London generally is the city of opportunities, right? I wasn't coming from a small city, but not to that scale. I suddenly, landed in between people having loads of money, and I mean like loads, the amounts of money you'll never experience. I will never experience either. And then on the other end, people like us working, very, very hard to actually pay rent and, put food on the table, right? So I suddenly noticed like this different world, and having access directly to those people was just within, my hand movement. So yeah, I kind of stayed because I wanted to explore and experience that. And then to be fair, I got an opportunity to study in here as well. I did my first degree in London in Middlesex University. It had nothing to do with construction, but it was super cool. And yeah, that's basically how it all started.
I must say, I've met quite a few people from all over Europe. And in fact, I coach quite a few. And some people from Poland and Romania and Ukraine who are doing so well. And they've come over here without language skills, without being brought up here. And they've made businesses and they're doing really, really well. And they're thankful for the opportunity. I think generally in the UK, we run quite an honest marketplace. I'll say it's entirely honest, but it's pretty honest compared to other countries. And I think when people come here and start a business and they kind of see that's kind of quite refreshing for them.
Yeah, to be fair, it's at least comparing to Poland, there's a lot of support in here in terms of maybe not even financial. I mean, yes, there are, all sorts of grants and these types of opportunities for, business owners to apply. But in terms of the actual startups, there's a lot of support, as in the knowledge, experience, mentorship. Universities organize all sorts of programs and, educational systems where people wanting to go into business or starting business have that chance. In Poland, it's just something that's unheard of. I never, ever in my journey in Poland heard about anybody, any organization organizing any type of educational system for somebody wanting to go into business. That's a big difference, I think. It's almost like being a business owner in the UK is promoted to a certain degree. It's almost shown like, well, here are all the tools. I'll tell you how to make business as long as you have a good skill, as in trade-wise. Whereas in Poland, it's almost like, you don't have to have a business. All you need to do is have your trade, come to me, work for me the next 45 years, and then retire. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. That's, I think that's why, entrepreneurs, I suppose we get a lot of people with entrepreneurial spirit coming over here. But, I think it's brilliant. The title of the podcast is Bust and Beyond, and we were talking about a company that you were associated with that went bust more than once. Obviously, we're not going to use any names here, but tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so basically, when I was doing my first degree, I started working as a junior project manager in a construction company. And basically, it just kind of grew from there. It was quite a small company. We had about 150,000 turnover at the time. We probably had one project, which was a loft conversion. We had 7 to 8 guys on the book, the very typical Bob the Builder setup. And then basically I joined the company as in, an office person, right? So I was doing all of the procurement, purchases. I slowly grew and learned all the quantity surveying skills that are needed in the construction company, doing all the takeoffs, putting budgets together. I then had to start learning, all sorts of programming, planning work, and developing these project management skills up until the completion. So as the company was actually growing, I was growing with it. But, what I never had was somebody I could learn from. So the only way for me to learn was through my own mistakes, unfortunately. And as we all know, making mistakes, it's one thing that it's a good lesson, but unfortunately it's costly. When I joined that company that I stayed 7 years, but the actual company, I think it went bust 2 or 3 times within the period that I was there. So, for various reasons. When basically I was there at some point, we knew, me and my director, we knew that it was going bust. But to be fair, everybody thought that we're just rebranding, changing the name, making it more prestigious and, luxury, etc. So, yeah, that was interesting time, I must say. And yeah, well, the biggest reason why we had to go bust was we haven't been paid, right? We started a massive project for a private client. The contract was written at the back of a fag pack, so you can imagine the detail. It was more or less the time when massive basements were being dug and done in all around London. CDM was just coming into force, so nobody really heard about it yet at the time. And yeah, basically we put a price together for a basement. It was massively underpriced. We couldn't deliver for the price that was agreed. The client wasn't willing to have any type of a compromise. We didn't really have a cash flow to carry on working on that basis. So we had to seize that company quite quickly.
I think there's a certain approach in some contracting companies, and I've seen it a few times. And I suppose really I kind of recognise it because perhaps I had the same attitude many years ago, which is, yeah, let's give it a go. Let's just go for it. Let's fly by the seat of our pants and see what happens. And you can't do that with pricing because you run out of cash, and your other jobs might support it, and you think they're gonna support you, but just need 2 problems. and you haven't got enough cash to see yourself through. And I think it's quite common to take that risk without quantifying it. So actually sitting down and going, look, if we've got this wrong, what's it going to cost us? What could we have wrong? Say you could be competitive for a job, you decide you can do it using a certain method rather than the more expensive method, then you can't. Right, what's the difference? What's it going to cost you? Are we going to be able to cover that? I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I mean, if I knew at the time what I know now, then I'd definitely look at it from a completely different angle. But it's almost like you look at it from a marketing perspective as well, right? I've done many projects that, we barely broke even, or, we didn't even make any money and probably lost in terms of all the overheads and, all sorts of other costs that weren't calculated in the actual bill of quants. But these types of, small, we would call it favor jobs, would bring us so many bigger projects that it's just something you consider like advertisement, right? Rather than paying somebody to put, your ad in a magazine, you just, refurbish somebody's flat, or you do somebody's bathroom or stuff like that. But at the same time, an interesting thing you said in terms of the cash flow prognosis, right? So when you're at the point of, tendering, pre-tendering, there was a time when I started my own business when, I never started my own business thinking I'm going to be working on the client side. I've actually started by putting tender responses for the contractors. So usually when I was doing that, I had the initial conversation with them in terms of how do you actually assess whether it's the tender you want to provide the response to or not. And cash flow is a big thing, right? Because you've got all the projects who have reduced VAT. Now, when we've got the reverse VAT, it's a little bit easier. Back then, if you were paid 5% VAT by the client versus you had to pay 20% for everything, it's a big difference for people in terms of cash flow. You can negotiate some of the terms. You can put some of the terms and some of the boundaries to protect your cash flow in your tender response, right? But in order to do that, you have to know about this and you have to plan it strategically so you don't end up under the line.
Well, actually, that's a really interesting point, because I harp on about tender responses and about tenders and how, the whole kind of idea that people do on the back of a fag packet and send it in doesn't help anyone. It's what I call it's a major touch with your client and their representatives. It should be an absolutely thought out document that sells you, makes it very clear how you operate, cash flow forecast, program, all the kind of stuff that, people were looking for. And that makes a difference. And so you're on the client side, you have two, this is a good question, because I often say this to people, and you can tell me from the client side. You have two tenders. One is absolutely immaculate, everything's in there, they've got a program, they've got the cash flow forecast, and the difference in price is about 5 to 10 grand between that and the next one down, who hasn't got cash flow forecast, hasn't got a program, and has basically sent you a 2-pager. Which one do you err towards? Which one do you prefer?
Well, obviously the one that's more expensive, right? But I usually assess other things as well. So, I do something called pre-tender qualification. So I want to know that everybody's financially stable, that, they haven't set up last week, and, they don't really lean on the insurance that their father has somewhere in Birmingham for a company that, existed 16 years ago. Basically, that's, putting two and two together. If these companies are similar size, similar scale, and similar setup, then obviously the one that's, easy for me to process, easy for me to read, it doesn't require me asking for additional information, is the one I'm going to lean towards. I get asked by the contractors a lot these days, could you give me some feedback? And I usually say, well, you've seen how many inquiries I've sent you after you've submitted your tender. That's really your feedback. That's often, the key information that was missing in your response that I couldn't really find easily, or it wasn't there. And that, tends to be the win the job or not.
And can I ask you also, it's something that I kind of go into quite a bit. When someone loses a tender, how many of them write to you and say, look, sorry we lost this tender, can we have some feedback, and could we be considered for the future?
Usually it's 60%, I would say. It's usually more than half of them. But usually they do it not when we've already made a decision about the tender. They usually do it probably 2-3 days after they've submitted. What are your thoughts? Like, what's the outcome? Can you let us know? And if I'll say, I don't know at this point, or, we have a meeting planned whenever with the clients to go over this proposal, then probably not many from there. Not many people after that goes back, yeah, well, for the next one, we'd love to work together, or, perhaps you could tell us what we could do different.
Yeah, and I think, I must say, when I was placing work for my company, most people place a few £1 million a year. If someone did that, if they wrote afterwards and said, look, sorry we didn't get this one, we're really keen to work with you, can you give some feedback on the tender and see if we can do better next time, I actually preferred them for the next job, because it was a very professional thing to do. It was quite a big thing. But it isn't such an important part of that. And what about, you might find the way you're set up, it might be slightly different, but how many people just don't tender when they say they're going to?
I'm going to say it varies. I usually blame it, like we said, on the market as well. Last couple of years were very different. When the demand was huge, people just had queues of clients waiting for them to do the work. So the actual appetite for tenders and responding to tenders was very little, very low. And then, it's pretty much, the percentage of people that would actually reply or provide a quote or provide like a decent response would be very little. But I actually just finished a tender for a project last week. And it was very interesting for me to know that now we've asked 5 companies for a tender. 5 out of 5 returned. And the quotes were fairly, given that we had, very small companies, as in the one-man banders, up until, very well-established, 2 million turnover type of a companies, the price difference was relatively low. It was within 10%. So it wasn't really that much. Yeah, so it kind of tells me the market's changing, right? People are eager to get more work or to get the right work, and it's good to see. But one other thing I wanted to say as well, when you mentioned about you wanting to speak to the person that would ask you how did I do in tender last time, that you would want to speak to them more on the next one. So interestingly, I sometimes, when I meet people, when I meet a builder somewhere, when I meet, a construction company director or a business development director, a lot of them have that type of, oh, let's go have lunch, or, let's go for a drink, etc. Whereas not many people actually asks you, do you want to go and see one of our projects that we've just finished? Or would you like to go and see one of our live sites? And I was asked once for that, like, we've got this lovely project down in Mayfair. It's, it's a penthouse apartment. Would you like to come over and have a look? And as a PM, that's much more interesting for me than actually going and having another lunch with somebody. And I must say, the guy win me there, because even though he tends to be the top of the tender list in terms of his prices. But I know why, because I've been to his site. I've seen the quality of the work. I've seen, how the site is being run, who's on it, that the information's there, that the office setup is there. So it's just something that I can appreciate in terms of them putting a higher quote, right?
Oh, I totally understand. In my day, I think lunches were a big part of business, and I just don't think they are anymore. And I think, looking back on it, I most probably had too many lunches, and they actually weren't productive. And actually looking around people's sites and other things is more productive, and actually them being interested in being professional is quite important. And I think if something's missing from the industry, and I'm not, that's quite a thing to say. There is lots of people in the industry that aren't very professional in the way they operate. I know there are professional people in the industry. I'm not saying there isn't. There are lots of people that aren't. And I think, the whole point of not returning a tender, not just communicating, simple communication with people, just shows that we're not professional. I've found a lot of people with what I do because, I'll be honest with you, and I'll be honest with the listeners, people don't kind of come and volunteer to be coached. I tend to have to approach them and say, look, have you ever thought about this? And I kind of call it screaming and kicking. But how many people don't phone back? Don't ever answer the phone? I mean, if you're not answering your phone to a number, how do you know it's not someone trying to offer you work? And that's a large percentage. I say half of the people will not communicate properly. And I think that's a big part of the industry. It's just, we call it ghosting, when you just, people just ignore you. It's a big thing. And I think that is a problem. So if they're going to treat me like that, not knowing who I am or not being professional about the communication with me generally, how are they going to treat a client when it kicks off? When the client's trying to get hold of them and go, well, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? Yeah, just don't answer your phone. That's a good idea. That'll solve the problem, not.
Well, it's not only that it's not really going to solve the problem, but worse, it's actually going to, put all sorts of other doubts and issues ahead of you, right? I've got a project at the moment where, let's just say, the contractor isn't the right contractor for the job. And funny enough, they're a very large scheme. They're a group of companies that my expectations were completely different. It's definitely not something I'm used to, what's happening, what's going on. But it comes to a point where if I have to go to a site and argue with somebody, like literally you argue with people over nothing. I mean, it's very hard, to communicate with someone where they're already in that defense mode, as in, doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter what the facts are, doesn't matter what you think, they're right and they're in their little bubble. And then what tends to happen is when, a client or a person, paying the bill at the end of the day sees something like that, they're trying to, make sure their interest is safe. So they starting to doubt everybody in the process, right? That if we can't even talk to each other properly, what else is being missed on? Or, what else are we all failing on? And yeah, it's just generally very, very hard to work around.
Yeah, I mean, I put a system in place for my clients called the client's journey. So first it makes them realise they've got a client. That's really important. We're trying to get away from this adversarial approach from both sides by managing the relationship and by being proactive in getting information, but also saying to the client before you start, this is how we work, this is what we're going to do, and this is how you interact with us, and really kind of setting that down in a system. Because what you don't want, if your client sees you as being professional and good at what you do, they're going to trust you. If they see you as arguing all the time, trying to get one over on them, they're not going to trust you. And that kind of affects the relationship quite a bit.
Yeah, no, 100%. And at the same time, right, I mean, at least in the niche that I work in, where we've got private clients, I mean, the chances of the same private client buying another house next year and moving over, they're not really that big. Maybe within 5 years' time, sure. The actual professional team, as in, whether it's the architects, interior designers, lighting designers, even suppliers, subcontractors, if they see that you're in control of what's going on, you have a clue and, you're very on it, you're clocked on, then they will recommend you to other clients who come in. Whereas if they see you as you're the one that argues about everything, I mean, there's absolutely no way in the world I'm working with that construction company again, right? It's just one of those things. And then worse, because if somebody asks me, what do I think about them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I totally understand that. And I've seen it a lot, and I've been both sides of the fence on that. But I think that, we've got to see ourselves as providing professional service as contractors, And we've got to understand that. And, you know, I think some of the bigger contractors do. That's why they've grown big. But the people kind of moving up through and doing these kind of smaller jobs, which might be £500,000, £1 million, £2 million, don't get it. Some do, some don't. And sometimes it's glaringly obvious why they're not getting work. Because one good, happy client can make all the difference to you getting other work. So that's quite important. So not specifically on going bust, but a very, very interesting chat. So I normally finish with the three things that you've learned that would that you wouldn't do again, to stop yourself from going bust or from, failure. But let's just change that to be a bit more useful. And this is very industry specific. What three things would you recommend a contractor does to get repeat work?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, I'd probably say cut on all the bullshit, as in lunches, drinks, dinners, Christmas parties. Forget it. Nobody cares. I get invites every week to something. I don't go to 90% because it's not in my headspace. I'm too busy. I don't really have time for it, and I don't really have a desire for it. I'd much rather go to a site meeting and be told, this is what's happening. These are the things that we need, or this is the information we're missing. This is what, the next stage will be. And this is what we need your help with. Can you get this and that and the other for us? I'd much rather work with people like this than actually those people who will invite me to, a dinner party on a Friday evening. That's definitely one of those.
Just on that one, I think some contractors are worried about being contractual, and they kind of get that confused with being professional. So when they kind of sit down, look, this is what we need this by this date, we need that. That's actually helping everybody. It's helping everybody understand the time frame, what they need to do. It's not being contractual. It's not that kind of scary contractual, we won't do this, won't do that. It's just making sure that everything's in place and everyone understands what they've got to do and what their part is to play.
100%. And to be fair, if everybody was 10% more contractual, we would probably have 10% less disputes out there, right? Not because being contractual means being the person nobody wants to be, but quite the opposite, right? All these processes and, methods or, communication in a formal or, formal-ish matter is actually there. So we're all very, very clear where we are. I had a conversation with a client about speakers 4 times before we started the project. He comes to site and he says, where are the speakers in the ceiling? So it's kind of, for all of us, we've got these processes and procedures that we've had this conversation on that date. You said we're not having any speakers. You said we're not having any speakers also on that day. You can't expect me to just guess that you've changed your mind. And it's very much the same with the contractors, right? If the project is coming to the point when there are delays, for example, everybody, the client, the professional team, the builder as well, if they're coming to a point where we will be delayed by whatever the reasons are, I'd rather know earlier than later, because maybe there are some things that we can do to speed up this process. Maybe there is something we can all do as a team to actually help out this contractor to deliver it quicker within the time frame. We can have a discussion about why it's the case, not to finger point at anybody, oh, it's your fault, you're paying. It's more about, well, what can we do about this and how much of an impact whatever we do is going to have. From my times when I used to work on the contractor's side, there's always more than one way of doing something, right? You can build a program the way you can build it. You can build a program for the work however you wish. Is it possible to do the same program 50% quicker? Probably yes, if you plan the work strategically different and if you'll be willing to put more bodies on it, right? I had projects where, we had 2 teams working, one in the basement, one in the loft, and they would meet in the middle. It's not uncommon, right? It happens. But in order to plan the work this way, you need to know about this. You need to know that these options are there, and that the main aim or the main goal of the project is actually to stick to the time frame. But if the contractor is not really communicating with you at all, and then he comes to you at the end when you're expecting a handover, and they'll say, well, we're going to be 6 more weeks because we haven't done any snugging, then that tells you, well,
I think the contractor generally, and the people I've come across that are contractors who have got themselves in that situation, they don't want to be the bearer of bad news, rather than just laying it out there and letting everyone, assist. It's a bit like, you might come across this client walks on site, says, oh, can you move that over there, walks away, contractor does it, is forgotten about, and then there's a variation that comes up and goes, what? This is non-contractual, this is being professional. Yes, of course we can do that, Mr. Whatever, but we do need a written instruction before we carry it out. What's the problem with that? You can do it on a sheet, but you've got to have some record of it. When you have a conversation about speakers, right, okay, there, is there speakers, okay, no, there isn't speakers, right. Then write to them, I'm just confirming you said there's no speakers in the house. Have that verbal conversation, back it up with some kind of written form of written conservation as well. So yeah, so I think that's quite an important area. Anything else? So we've done the first reason. So what's the other two?
Show somebody, impress them with your site and with your organization skills rather than going to lunch. The second one is, I'd probably say, respect all the people around you. As in, so many people is just, in that headspace, he's just a labourer. Don't worry about this. We don't need to talk we don't need to talk to him, or, we don't have to talk to the architect. You're Mr. Client. You're the walking checkbook, right? Hello, here's the red carpet. I had my first ever client coming through a recommendation from a florist. So you never really know who's watching you. You never really know who's listening. You never really know who's your next client going to be. So I'd say have that respect to everybody rather than trying to class people as in, well, you're the client, you're the most important person, because you don't know who's the most important person on that day on the site.
Well, I must say that is something that is very important to me personally. I think you should treat everybody as you want to be treated. And you talk about labourers on site. Part of, again, what I do is I work with my clients to empower the labourers. So make sure they know what they need to do, what they're accountable for. It changes everything. So if a labourer knows exactly what he's doing, you're not walking around telling him what to do all the time. That can be a big difference. So if he knows he's responsible for stacking material or reprotecting things or whatever, it just takes a lot of responsibility off the site manager to have to go around and tell him all the time. All you've got to do is sit down and have a half an hour conversation, explain what the accountability is, what the responsibility is. It makes all the difference. So everybody has got a role to play. And everyone's got an important role to play. I know if you've got a good labourer on site, I can see a site that's got a good labourer, I can see a site that's got a good site manager. You can know instantly as you walk on without even talking to anybody.
Usually you don't have to even walk in, right? I used to have sites where, the labourer, he would be cleaning the hoarding every day, literally just wiping it off from the dust. That tells you somebody actually cares, right? That's a very presentable site. So from that perspective, 100%, everybody has a role in that chain, right? And if one eye just falls out, something's not going to fit right and something's not going to work.
Absolutely. And what's the last one, would you say then?
What's the last one? Well, the last one, I would say that, it's worth remembering that the tender is not estimating and quoting. It's two different things. Tendering is actually when you're presenting your company and the way you're thinking about undertaking this project as a whole. So yes, there is an element of quoting and pricing and estimating, but there's all sorts of other things that you should be presenting and talking about in your tender response. And if you actually want to score some points from anybody, and trust me, I'm probably close to about 1,000 tenders by now that I've either seen or done myself. The tenders I was preparing, I was always getting a feedback that whoever was assessing these tenders, they've never seen something like it. They've never seen a response, thought through to that extent. Yes, of course, I was having a play with it and putting all sorts of graphics and infographics to literally blow people's minds. However, it made them stood up to the point that they would get more and more tender inquiries. And the more you tender, the bigger of a chance that one of these projects will land on you, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But I also think it's very important what you tender for. So, you've got to have a very, very strict criteria of what you're tendering for. Well, that's brilliant advice. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's been really interesting. Thank you for joining us. And, we'll close it down there.
Thank you for having me. And, hopefully speak soon.
Thanks for listening to Bust and Beyond with Robin Hayhurst. Be sure to tune in next time and visit his website at robinhayhurst.com.